All right, we are switching tracks now to female reproductive structures. So let's talk about female reproductive structures. So unlike men, all the female reproductive structures are held inside the body. They're protected inside the body. And let's see. So what does it look like? What can we see here? What does everything look like here? So the primary bit is the uterus, the ovaries. Connecting the ovaries to the uterus, or holding the ovaries in the uterus, is a ligament called the ovarian ligament. This ligament is not unlike that the gubernaculum. Not unlike the gubernaculum. Remember in males where the gubernaculum, this helped migrate the testicles down. Well, here the gubernaculum is called the ovarian ligament, and it holds the ovaries in place. The ovaries is where all the ovum are stored, or where ovum mature. So that's the female gonads, basically. The female genetic information is in there and in there. Then there's a fallopian tube, or otherwise known as an oviduct. I prefer the name fallopian tubes. It sounds way cooler. Fallopian tubes. And the fallopian tubes aren't actually attached to the ovary. And what happens is that basically an ovum jumps out. An egg jumps out of the ovary and travels down the fallopian tube into the uterus. The uterus this is where a baby will grow, where a baby will develop. The uterus, they say it's pear-shaped. I don't know if this is pear-shaped. Like upside down pear? It doesn't matter. And it's got basically two layers. The outside layer is a thick layer of muscle and elastic fibers, because this has to push out, has to contract and squish out a baby. And it also has to expand with a baby. It has to grow and expand with a baby. So the outer layer, which is called the myometrium, is the muscular elastic fiber layer. And then there's an inner layer that's there, the uterine lining. It's called the endometrium. There's a basal lining in there. But basically what happens with the endometrium is it can vary in thickness and basically becomes vascularized and becomes thicker depending on what part of a woman's cycle we're in. And we're going to talk about the cycle in another unit. But so basically this lining is what it expands, and then if a woman doesn't have a baby, she sheds that inner lining, and that's when during her menstrual, she has her period. We call it having her period. At the bottom here of the uterus, this is the cervix. It's the opening that leads up into the uterus. It's just called the cervix. Remember, we talked about the cervix before. We talked about positive feedback loops. When a baby presses on the cervix, that sends signals to the hypothalamus, which then produces oxytocin, and from the posterior pituitary gland releases oxytocin, which causes these muscles here, the myometrium, to contract and push the baby down, which causes more oxytocin, and that whole feedback loop. And then there's the vagina. That is the tunnel that leads to the opening, which is the labia. Lots of people confuse the opening to the vagina. They call that the vagina, but that's not the vagina. That's the labia. Vagina has muscles, and it produces mucus that is for the immune passive immunity and lubrication for during sex. Okay, so those are the macroscopic structures. And what the uterus looks like, and all those bits. Now, what happens in the ovaries is inside the ovary, you have what are called the oocytes, the eggs. And the eggs, unlike men do spermatogenesis when they reach maturity. They start making sperm. Remember those whatever those, I forget what the name of those. They in the seminiferous tubules, and they continuously make sperm. Women different. Women, while in the embryonic stage, they make all of the basically the cells that are going to become all the eggs that they will ever make. They make that while they're a fetus, up to the seventh month. And then that's it. They don't make any more. So all the eggs and then they guard and keep the eggs protected. Whereas men are like, make the sperm, shoot the sperm out everywhere. Women, different strategies of protecting the gonads. And so what those start out. So when a woman is in an embryo, she makes all of those eggs, and what those are called, they're called primary oocytes. And this happens before puberty. So in the embryo, so pre-puberty, she makes these primary oocytes, and they are stored inside those ovaries. Now, unique thing about the oocytes is that they are diploid, and what diploid means is they contain 46 chromosomes. They contain all the chromosomes that the woman has, those primary oocytes. On Facebook, it's a lovely, beautiful, poetic thought, but the cold science. I got the thing, so somebody sent a parent, and it was like, women, when a woman is pregnant with a daughter, her daughter has already made all the eggs, basically has made her grandchildren already. And so, or has made her granddaughters, the woman's granddaughters. It's like 3 generations all protected together. The daughter, yes, but the granddaughter, no, you're missing half the genetic material. She's carrying a primary oocyte, which contains all the DNA actually of the daughter. Contains all 46 chromosomes. It's just a storage thing for genes. It's a very poetic, lovely thought, but it's incorrect. You got to get the science correct. You got to take anatomy and physiology 12 before you send me poetic things on Facebook. So then what happens when a woman reaches maturity, what will happen is one of those primary oocytes, basically what those primary oocytes are, they're arrested, they're stopped in meiosis 1, and they will then, after puberty, one of them, they will every once in a while, once a month, one will be elected to continue meiosis 2, and mature into a secondary oocyte, and then into an ovum, which will be essentially half the woman's DNA. Just like the sperm, it'll be assorted, randomly assorted. We'll get half the DNA, 23 chromosomes. And then during fertilization, the sperm's 23 chromosomes and the ovum's 23 chromosomes come together, and you form an embryo that is now a combination of the mother's DNA and the father, half the mother's DNA randomly assorted, half the father's DNA randomly assorted. So in a way, half the grandfather and the grandmother's DNA, some of the grandfather's and grandmother's DNA from this side, and some of the grandmother's and grandfather's DNA from this side, which were half of the DNA from the great grandfather, and on and on and on. Those primary oocytes are surrounded by cells. They're very specialized. These things are very specialized, and they're surrounded by cells called follicular cells, and those serve the same job, similar job as when we saw in spermatogenesis. There was those Satori cells. Satori cells, is that what they're called? That give nutrients and chemical guidance to developing sperm. Well, these cells, the cells that surround the oocyte, are the same thing. Essentially, the same thing. They probably contain the same genetics, just in different ratios. Like the different parts are expressed in different ratios. And those make up the follicle. So follicular cells with the primary oocyte, they make up the follicle. That's called the follicle. So that's a whole the whole structure. And so you got lots of follicles inside the ovaries. Okay. Anything else that we need to say? Oh, well, here's a good picture of, here's a follicle. This is the oocyte. So this is the and these are the follicular cells. And as you can see, as it matures, the things grow bigger and change. This we'll talk about next time. Oocyte pathway. Oh yeah, we can cover this. We can cover this in this bit, right? Female reproductive. Yeah. So what happens is when the follicle matures, it shoots out of the ovary and heads to the fallopian tubes. And the fallopian tubes, so there's the ovary, the ovum shoots out, and these are called, they have a special name, I always say it wrong, they are called fimbriae. These are fimbriae. They're sort of like fingers that gently caress the ovary. It's all very nice. And then it bounces along down the fallopian tube. And how it's moved along down the fallopian tube is there are gentle cilia that push it along down the fallopian tube, and it bounces along. Now, if a woman has sex while this is happening, it's called ovulation, when the egg is bouncing along, and sperm make it up all the way up to here. They will fertilize that egg somewhere up here, and then the fertilized egg, which will be becoming an embryo now, will bounce down here and implant in the endometrium and grow into a baby. That's what happens. If it doesn't, it will bounce along and it will be expelled along with the inner lining of the uterus. Any names that I want you to know? Any kind of fancy things? Cilia, there's, oh look, there's the nice thing. So there's the egg, there it is. Look at that, fertilization happening here. So it becomes a zygote. And off it goes. There's the fallopian tube. Sometimes there's it's a myoptic pregnancy. I think that's what it's called. When the zygote stops, it doesn't make it down here, and the pregnancy continues here. It starts dividing in the fallopian tube. It's a huge mess requiring surgery. Okay, that is female reproductive structures. There we go. So, ovaries, primary, that's where the eggs are made. That's where the female's genetic material is. Before puberty, they don't mature. They're stored as a 46 chromosomes. So they have all the genetics of the woman. They're basically frozen in meiosis 1, surrounded by follicle cells. They're called the primary oocyte. They're surrounded by follicle cells. The whole thing makes up a follicle in the ovaries. Once the woman reaches puberty, once a month, a follicle will mature. So it will go into meiosis 2, mature, and come on out down the fallopian tube into the uterus. The uterus is that pear-shaped. I don't know, pear-shaped, if I like that term, pear-shaped. I guess so, upside down pear, sure. At the base is the cervix, 2 layers to the uterus, the muscular myometrium, and the inner lining, the endometrium, which expands in size depending on hormone levels and is shed away, and then the implantation happens in the endometrium. Vagina is the tube that leads from the labia to the uterus or to the cervix. It's also muscular, has cells that produce lubricant and passive immune, makes it more acidic, and etc. There you go.